right, awesome. Well, looks like we have a good chunk of people here. So we'll go ahead and get started. We will be sending out this recording as well after. So if you are joining us a little bit late, you will get the recording of this full webinar. Thank you for joining. This is our second webinar in our spring series for students. We're just really happy that you're able to join us this evening. This is a topic that we did not just pick out of a hat. One thing that we have been doing kind of over the years as the people who oversee the Leadership Academy and some other collegiate recovery initiatives at Safe Project is every time we offer something, every time we do an evaluation of how the program went, we always ask what kind of content could we have included in this cohort that would have been more helpful for you. And organization and delegation is something that comes up almost every time. And naturally, because we all want to be a little bit more organized, we all want to kind of have our life together a little bit more. So we thought this would be a great time to talk about just what it means to be organized, hopefully do some myth bunking, or is that what it's called? I think it's myth bunking. And hopefully just give you all something like very tangible that you can walk away with. And the reason that it's Dylan and I, usually we kind of contract some subject matter experts to come in and share with our attendees for our webinars. But as we were kind of going through the content that we wanted to share and brainstorming speakers that we wanted to bring on, we thought to ourselves, Dylan and I on the Safe Campuses team, we are both, I'd like to think that we're both successful in our roles, but we both look at organization and delegation and just how our brains work is works very different. So we decided that we would be the presenters and that we would kind of share a little bit about what organization means to us. And like I said, just really give y'all some tangible things to walk away with. So that being said, we're just going to jump right in. If you don't know me, I know that we have a lot of Leadership Academy students on this webinar, but if you don't know me, my name is Hannah Fitzpatrick. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Associate Director of our Safe Campuses initiative here at Safe Project.
My name is Dylan. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm also on the campuses team, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Dylan. All right, so this is just kind of an overview of what we're going to chat about today. I won't go over each one individually, but we really just want to give you some advice, things that have worked for us in our professional lives and our personal lives as well. So you can walk away with things that you can start hopefully implementing in your own lives. And then also we just want to share like how we operate in the world and how we got to that point, and how there's no really like gold standard when it comes to these two things. We are all so different, and we can all be successful by approaching things like organization and delegation in different ways. So these are just going to be some things that we go over throughout the webinar. All right, so I've said this about 5 times already. We are all very different when it comes to organization. And I have to give kudos to Dylan for finding these 2 visuals, because I am fairly certain that the visual, I think it's on my left of the folders, is an actual capture of my Google Drive. I am just the kind of person that has a folder for everything. There is a place for everything. It's just how I've been for as long as I can remember. It's just something like organization truly is just something that has come naturally to me. I remember as a preteen, I was probably maybe 11 or 12. I remember going out with my parents and my siblings. I don't know, we might've been going to Kmart or something like that. I don't know if y'all remember Kmart, but and we came home and I was just bored. So I went in my room and I literally tore it apart. It was clean, but I just tore the room apart. I threw all my papers everywhere simply so I could clean it up after and like reorganize things. And that sounds really crazy. It is a little bit crazy. I would never do that now. But truly, organization is just something I think that I enjoy, but it also has very like practical, just a practical use in my day-to-day life. So it's not something, I know some people find it to be a hindrance and it's like, oh, just one more thing I have to worry about. But for me, just naturally how I was created, that is kind of how I operate in the world. So Dylan, I know that you see things a little bit differently. So I'd love to hear how you operate in the world.
Yeah. So you mentioned that some people see organization as like a hindrance or a barrier. That's definitely how my brain works most days, where I would definitely say that I have never been accused of being like traditionally organized. That's never been something that I think people have used to describe me. But I do think I'm still productive and effective at what I do. And so I use organization more as a means to an end, that I know things I know I have to do to stay on track, more than something I do to like make me more productive. So on the right side is my brain, and how I organize things is I'm not really a math person, but I am a really full, really wild whiteboard kind of person. And I like things to be messy so I can see how they connect in ways that may not be as obvious if they weren't organized, or if they were more traditionally organized. So yeah, I think I would definitely identify as a more creative than an organized person, though they're not like either or. But I've learned how to be more organized as I've had more responsibilities, that I would get in trouble if I wasn't as organized as I am. And so really I'm as organized as I need to be to work with people like Hannah. So I think that's how I would say it.
We balance each other out pretty well. So we'd love to hear just if there's any way, I know that there's I think about 40 people here on this webinar, and I know that every one of us falls on the spectrum somewhere. So I would love to hear whether you consider yourself an organized person or not. I would just love to hear in the chat just some ways that you try to stay organized, whether you're successful in those attempts, that doesn't matter. But what are some things that you do in your life that that are helpful in just keeping your life together, so to speak? While y'all share in the chat box, we're going to jump into just some really like high level quick tips that we have. And the main goal here is to just show that, again, Dylan and I we're both good, decent at our jobs. I'm just going to say we're good at our jobs. Okay. But we do things so differently. So I'm just going to share a couple tips, and then I'll pass it over to Dylan and have him share a couple tips. For me, one thing that's really important, and I don't know if this is like an actual term, Cornerstone Habits, but for me, what a cornerstone habit basically is it's like one thing that you do that has kind of an impact or a domino effect on all of the other things that you do. So an example of this in my life personally would be working out in the morning. If I can find a way to get myself out of bed early enough to squeeze in a workout, everything else in my day usually seems a little bit better. I feel a little bit more energized, a little more motivated. I feel it's easier for me to make healthy food decisions. I am, a little bit less anxious. I'm able to get a better night's sleep. So that would be an example of a cornerstone habit in my personal life. In my professional life, one thing that I do is I take about maybe 30 to 40 minutes, either on a Sunday evening or a Monday morning before I get started with work. And I just pull out my planner, and I kind of I look at my calendar, and I make a to-do list, and I make it, put any appointments in my planner. And I know this sounds like, for people who aren't planner people, they're like, that's way too much. And that's just like one thing to add to your plate. But for me, I love this practice because it allows me to kind of foresee what I have going on that week. So instead of waking up Monday and being like, oh my goodness, I need to go brush my teeth because I have a meeting in 30 minutes, I've already kind of thought about it the night before. And I've been able, I also put like birthdays in there. That way, if I need to order something on Amazon real quick from my mom, I can do that if I need to. And it's just a way for me to kind of feel prepared. So everybody has a different cornerstone habit, I think, but I think that there are like big habits that we have that impact the rest of the habits that we have going on in our lives. To piggyback off of that, another habit that I have gotten into is really utilizing Google Calendar. And I use one calendar for my personal and professional life. And this is just, obviously it's a great way to keep track of like meetings and things that I have going on. But it's also, I put doctor's appointments in there. I also put birthdays in there. I put reminders in there. And it's really just like a one-stop shop for everything that I have going on in life. I was joking with Dylan the other day and saying that like my life is basically dictated by my Google Calendar, and I have no idea what's happening in life if I don't look at my Google Calendar. So once you get into the habit of just throwing everything in there, it's really nice to just pull it up on your phone and be like, okay, I need to be like showered and ready to go by 10 a.m. tomorrow. And I just like being prepared in that way. And then lastly for me, this might be a Marie Kondo thing. I'm not sure where I got this from, but I believe in it. Outer order, inner peace is something that I just really, really resonate with. When, my house is somewhat tidy and, I don't have 800 unread emails in my inbox and my desk is relatively clear and I don't have like 3 cups of coffee and water bottles and pens and highlighters all over the place, I just feel a little bit better. I feel a little bit more like, I guess, less distracted, and like I can really focus on what's the task at hand instead of being like, oh my goodness, I'm about to spill yesterday's coffee on my keyboard and there's just stuff everywhere. So I try to in the evenings before I go to bed, I'll just pick up stuff that I've like thrown around the house for and it takes 5 minutes. I'll just like fold the blankets and put them away. And then in the morning when I come into my office, I also just put all the papers in a pile, make sure all the pens are kind of put away. That way it just feels like a little bit more peaceful. So Dylan, I'll toss it over to you
now. So yeah, you're talking about how like you get up early and kind of get your life going that way. I am a roll out of bed, roll into a meeting kind of person, especially during COVID. And I think I'll get to a little bit of what's on the slide, but part of I think the key difference between Hannah and I is I am a chaos driven and chaos thriving person. We'll talk about it a little bit, but part of that is the environment I grew up in. I was productive then, so I like fool myself into thinking that makes me productive now. But the older I get, the more I think I become more like Hannah in ways that are helpful for me. But naturally, I think I've always seen that as an other thing, but I'm becoming more and more like that. But my biggest tip for people who are looking for a tangible tip from me, which I don't know why you would look to me for advice on being organized, but the first one is I use checklists for everything now. I used to be one of those people that had sticky notes all over the place, and it was kind of a mess. And it wasn't kind of a mess; it was absolutely a mess. And so I was surrounding myself with the chaos of sticky notes, and then I moved on to actually. I have index cards. If you've ever been in a meeting with me where we're doing things, I'll like pull up a card and start writing on it or whatever. They're the brand names on the screen, and if you want to look them up, you can. They're a little bit more expensive than like your usual like $2 or $3 index card, but they work for me. And in becoming more organized over the years, I found that checklists are easiest for me to stay, and they keep me going, especially when I do things like write deadlines for myself and also indicate how long I think a task is going to take, so I can schedule my day a little bit more, so I can fill those gaps with chaos. So I can get just enough of a structure to my day where I can fill that structure with chaos and have the building not burn down. And so what that means for me is like I am just organized enough where I can still be super flexible with myself and not see organization as me telling myself what to do, but more of me telling myself what I should probably get done today. So it's kind of a bit of the distinction between Hannah and I. But for me, the biggest change in my life in terms of a behavior that I've done that I encourage everyone to do is just, if you have an idea or you hear something that you need to do or should do, write it down immediately. I think one of the small changes I made in my life when I was a first year in college was I kept a pen or a pencil with me everywhere. I started writing on my hands when I needed to do something, and people would be kind of confused why my hands are always like smudged ink. But I've since changed, since now I have a desk, to using index cards or sticky notes to write things down. So that's me. And I jokingly put the end slide here. So if you want to go to the next slide, you can, Hannah. Because I remember when I was kind of at my worst, I would say, when it comes to being unorganized, I was always looking for that next silver bullet to keep me organized. I would then do that thing for about 3 days. I would forget about it, and then I would have a pile of unused journals in the corner of my room, or just a massive stack of tips and tricks that they didn't work for me. And so we're going to go a little bit deeper today and try to figure out how we, each Hannah and I, and how we hope you all can benefit from this, is to kind of build a system for how you can find what works for you, rather than just kind of try to deduce based on a million different options what may work some days rather than others. So
Yeah, so you are probably noticing a theme here, and that theme being that there really isn't a gold standard. I think that one reason that this is such a highly sought after topic that we're all trying to strive towards and learn more about is because we do feel like, oh, if I just could be more of this or less of this, then I'll be more organized and my life would be more together. And of course, there are some very like tangible things that you can do in your life that make your life less chaotic and more just manageable. But I think what we really want to get across, the kind of the big picture, the big takeaway is just because you yourself or me as Hannah does something a certain way, it doesn't make it the quote unquote right way. It just makes it the thing that works well for me. And I'm as you've learned in this very short time together, I'm pretty type A. Everything has like a spot. And Dylan, obviously, he's able to operate in a little bit more of a chaotic environment. Where me personally, like I don't do good in chaos. Like if I was ever in like a burning building, don't come to me for help because I would probably be hiding under a table somewhere. But yeah, that's really the big real big picture that we want y'all to realize that we're all a little bit different and we all have different ways of doing things. And I think it took me a while to get to this point, because I think as human beings we kind of think, oh well, the way I do things is the best way, the right way, the most organized way, whatever whatever it may be. The biggest realization for me was accepting that the way that other people are might actually work. I'll never forget, years ago after college, I had a part-time job as a barista at a coffee shop, and it was kind of like a barista kind of cocktail place. So there was people that worked really, really early in the morning at like 5, and there was people that didn't come in until like 5 that night for the later shift. And I've always been a morning person as long as I can remember. I don't think I've ever pulled an all-nighter to like finish a paper. I'd rather take a 0 than pull an all-nighter. Um, and I just remember I couldn't wrap my head around the people that desired to come in at 5 p.m. Like they actually requested that shift because they enjoy being up at night. And I just couldn't wrap my head around that. And then I, dug into that a little bit deeper and realized that they're just different. They see the world differently. They have, they're just different. And once I realized that the way other people does things might actually work for them, even though it doesn't work for me, that's when it really opened up the whole world. Dylan, is there anything that you want to add to that?
I think the only thing that I've been thinking about as you were talking a little bit is that the things that work for me at different points of my life also change. And so when I was in college, if I was using index cards for checklists, they would have disappeared into the garbage that was my bedroom. But now I'm a more clean and organized person physically, because there are parts of me that do agree with the outer, what did you say? Outer something, inner peace?
Outer order, inner peace.
Outer order, inner peace. Because I like for me, that's satisfying aesthetically. Where when I was in college, I had to write everything on literally a mirror or something that was stationary attached to my wall, or it would disappear. And so I've used the same tactic, but I've had to change little pieces of it to make it work better for me. So.
Yep. Awesome. So, we've shared a couple tangible things, that we do that work for us. We're also going to share a couple more like really concrete ways to be a little bit more organized. But I think that what's really important to talk about just really briefly is like, why are we the way we are? when it comes to this topic specifically. And, it's funny, when we were drafting the content for this webinar, and we decided that Dylan and I were going to be the presenters, I thought that this would be like a shoe in for me, because I've always been a little bit organized. I enjoy it. And I really had a hard time figuring out, well, why am I this way? Why do I need color-coded spreadsheets and my Google Calendar and all of these things? And I think for me, it came down to I really put a lot of thought into this, and it came down to two things for me. The first one was past experiences. And I could probably talk for hours about this, but I think I'm a middle child, and I think growing up, I was the one that never got in trouble. And I had my older brother and my younger sister taking care of that. And I just was kind of, the good one. And my parents reminded me of that. They were like, why can't you guys be more like Hannah? And I think that really like got into my psyche a little bit, about having to always put on this show that everything was, put together and organized. And so I think that's kind of what maybe paved the way for me. And then in addition to that, I think another reason that I am the way that I am is a reflection of my core values. And one of my core values is intentionality, and just making people feel good and feel like respected and loved and all of those things. And I think sometimes when you're operating from a really chaotic place, where you're showing up late to things, you're missing important days, maybe forget your mom's birthday. And, I've actually done that before. So I'm not saying I don't do these things, but there's something to organization, being organized, and kind of having the foresight to, remember the important days, and to show up on time to an event that somebody spent hours putting together, instead of, showing up 20 minutes late, like, oh yeah, I'm here, when got the whole world of chaos around me. I just think that for me personally, that's really important. So those two things are kind of, I think, at the core of why I am the way I am. Dylan, how about you?
Yeah, when you first started, you were talking about like how you had to think pretty hard about this. I think as you were saying that, I was thinking about why this wasn't something I had to think a lot about. And I think that was because we live in a world where I have to rationalize why I organize the way I do, because I want to model myself after people like Hannah. Like we like when we hear the words organized, we think of Hannah, and I Hannah, we love that about you. And so like I think I've spent my whole life trying to rationalize or make excuses for myself, is probably one way to say it, of why I am I am often unorganized or not organized in a way that my teachers were, or that the people I looked up to were. And so, yeah, a little bit of kind of how I developed into the chaotic individual that I am is that there was a bit of a shift in my life when I was a young kid, where I was the youngest of 7 siblings, with the oldest siblings in my life having been in prison for their relationship with drugs by the time I was even 10 years old. And so their experiences, and me being the youngest of so many kids, the expectations were not very high for me. But I happened to have low expectations, and I was just that kid that didn't have to study for school or didn't have to try very hard to do my homework. I remember my brother is 3 years older than me, and I would do his homework for fun. And like, it's just silly stuff like that. But it was being surrounded by chaos, but also low expectations. And so I didn't feel like I needed to be organized enough to reach something, because I was already there in some ways, which feels stupid to say, and it feels like a humble brag, but it just is. That's kind of what it was for me. And then there were points in my life where that didn't work out, and so I was embarrassed by, oh, I let this person down, or I was in front of the class and I was the only one who didn't have my homework because I forgot, because I was so unorganized. And those are moments where I did learn organizational skills, but organization has always been something I had to learn in reaction to, not something I did as kind of just naturally because it was pleasing to me. So yeah, like I then became a student leader I was an RA at Ohio State for way too long, like 3 years, I think. And it was like having a job like that, and having 18 hours in some semesters, and like just taking too many classes a lot of the time. that I had to, in order to not let myself down, not to let people down around me who were depending on me, I had to create just enough organization to stay afloat, but not too much where I felt like I was being like outside of my integrity or inauthentic, because that's just not who I am most days. And so, yeah, it's a bit about me.
Thanks, Dylan.
Oh, one more point is that I do want to mention something that I think is important, is that as a professional, as a dude who is a professional, there is like always the layer that the dudes in the audience who will become professionals, is that we can kind of get away with showing up to meetings being unprepared or underprepared and still be seen as experts. When I learned that, when I heard that kind of a reality when I was in college, it has now become, I've almost done the opposite, or I still show up to some meetings unprepared. Of course I do. But as Hannah will be able to attest to, like, I put a lot of work into being prepared for like meetings with slideshows or with handouts. And that's more of me trying to be authentic, to use the best of myself, but also not take advantage of privilege for the sake of it. So, yeah.
That's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes.
Yeah. So, as you've kind of heard us talk, there's some self-reflection that I think sets us all up to be better equipped to find what best works for us, and to think about how we can either create or change or understand our behavior. And so if you have a notebook, feel free to take some notes. If you want to leave notes in the chat, whatever you want to do. But I encourage folks to think of your goals. And when I say goals, I really mean outcomes. And so like, what do you think, or what does being organized get you? What are you able to accomplish or not experience because of your relationship with being organized? Jonathan, they say he's a meat and potatoes kind of guy. So when it comes, and then so there's outcomes and goals. Think about that, about what you're going to get out of your relationship to organization, and then habits. So for me, a lot of ways of being organized are not, for some reason, they never cross the boundary towards being habitual. But for some reasons, checklists are now habitual to me. That's a way of being organized that feels like a habit that I don't have to think a lot about it to use it as an organizational tool. And so, yeah, thinking about what do you do to be organized, even when you don't think about it very much. Or what kind of sabotages your relationship to being organized when you're not thinking about it enough. And then the third one is kind of just your way of being and your identity when it comes to being organized. Obviously, it's easy for Hannah to say she is an organized person. I spent a lot of my life trying to stop saying as much, I am just not an organized person, because I would use it as an excuse before and a way to put burden on other people. And so if you hold something as an identity, it's harder to change it and harder to make it more positive. And so, especially if your identity to organization is just, well, I'm just not that. I encourage those folks who that is their answer to that idea to challenge that a little bit today, because we all can find ways to be more organized or be more effective with the habits and behaviors that we choose. So, yeah. And then we're going to really quickly go through, we're going to distill an almost 300-page book down to 2 slides in about 2 minutes. So it's a book called Atomic Habits. It has sold way too many copies and has 1.5 million reviews on Amazon. But it really boils down to 4 quote unquote laws of behavioral change. So there are things that you can do mindfully about and think mindfully about a behavior to kind of hack your brain into making it into a habit. And so the first one of the laws is, if you make something very obvious, so if you make a cue to do something very obvious, you're more likely to continue on actually doing it. If something is more attractive to you, you're more likely to do it. If it's easy for you to do, of course, you're more likely to do it. And then if it's satisfying to have done, you're going to be more likely to return to it later. So if we go to the next slide. The reality is that a lot of you in the audience are in recovery or have a relationship with addiction in some way. And so the right side of this slide is going to sound familiar, which is really those laws that we were talking about, but applied to changing a behavior that was, quote unquote, it was less effective or negative in a way. And so if you change them, I'll use the example of someone who wants to stop drinking by just kind of like cold turkey stop drinking, right? So maybe used to drink way too much, one of the first things they may do is pour out all the alcohol, right? They'll make the alcohol invisible, so it's not hanging around their apartment. They'll get rid of the Bud Light posters on their walls, thinking of just like frat rooms that I've been in college. And then they'll make it unattractive. And so that usually is, when it comes to things like substance use, it is the kind of the mind shift of this actually isn't worth what I thought it was. This doesn't have the impact that I wanted it to have. And so it becomes less attractive in that way. And then making it difficult. If you used to only have to cross the street to get substance of choice, but now you have to drive 3.5 hours, you're probably less likely to go obtain whatever that substance was. And then make it unsatisfying. Usually that is the consequences that kind of initiate behavior change. And so if it was unsatisfying or caused a consequence, that means it's less satisfying, or you're less likely to want to do it again. So Hannah, do you want to apply that to the Leadership Academy projects in a positive way?
Yeah, so Dylan obviously just explained kind of how to maybe change behavior, like bad behaviors that you want to kind of, change up a little bit. But you can flip this on its head and do the exact opposite. So a lot of our students here that are attending this webinar are part of our Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy. If you're not familiar with it, please take a look at our website. It's an awesome program for students in recovery as well as allies of recovery as well. But part of the program, the students are required to implement a project on their campus that is going to make a positive impact on collegiate recovery in some way. And there's a lot of room to do pretty much whatever you want, as long as it has a clear impact on how this is going to make collegiate recovery expand on your campus. And when we're at the very beginning of the year, we go over kind of some tips on picking a project, because obviously it's hard to just pick anything and go do it. The first thing that we say is it needs to be something that you see as a need on your campus. Somebody who's going to school at a small community college in rural Nevada is going to see very different needs than a metropolitan campus in Washington, D.C. So we always say, make it be something that's obvious, an obvious need on your campus. Also make it something that's attractive to you. So as I kind of brainstorm one-on-one with students, they say, well, I think our campus really needs a recovery ally training, but I don't know if I want to be the one to do that. Well, then don't do that for your project, because if it's not something that you're passionate about and that sounds like something that you want to work on for 9 months, you're not going to stick with it. And it's not going to be something that you want to continue with for the rest of the program. So make intentional decisions to make that new habit or whatever you're working on attractive to you. Make it easy. And I think easy kind of has like a weird stigma attached to it. Easy, there's nothing wrong with it being easy. But I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the previous piece of advice about making it attractive, is that I know I personally have found when I'm passionate about something, or when I, don't have to, it kind of comes effortlessly. I just do it more often. So, for example, yesterday I walked downstairs, and my husband and I have been eating like a lot of muffins lately, and it's not good, but whatever. He had like a plate of vegetables sitting on the counter that he had chopped up earlier in the day. And he was just like walking into the kitchen and grabbing vegetables because they were there. Instead of having to like go to the cabinet and get out the junk food, they were just there. So make it easy and easily accessible when you're trying to make behavioral changes. And then of course, making it satisfying. So kind of going back to the Collegiate Recovery Leadership Academy project, make it something that you're going to find rewarding at the end. Whether it's a personal accomplishment, or that others are going to benefit from what you're implementing. Just make sure that it's going to be satisfying in the end after you've put all of this work into it. So that's just kind of some practical ways, but yeah, this is it's a lot easier said than done, and we're really boiling it down. It does take a lot of work, but it's possible.
I just want to, this is, I think, a really good visual of how this all works, especially when you take it down to kind of like smaller level things like eating healthier or going on a run in the morning. If you want to screenshot this, we'll come back to it later as well if you want. But going around this circle when it comes to behavior kind of explains how these feed into each other and can make all of this a lot easier. So.
Alrighty, so delegation. This is going to be, we're not going to go as deep into delegation as organization, but it's definitely something, it's an important skill to learn. And to be totally honest, for me, it's very, very much so a skill that is ever evolving and very much in progress. This is not something that comes naturally to me. I think some people, especially people with strong leadership skills, are naturally good delegators. They can say, they have the confidence in saying, I know John can do this. I know Sam can do this, and I am happy, and I'm going to be happy with whatever outcome that they provide. And there's people like me who it just doesn't come naturally at all. And I think that that's, you know, people struggle with this for different reasons. I know for me, it's probably an issue of control. You know, I like things to be done the way that I like them to be done, and I know that if I do them, that I'm going to get a specific outcome. Whereas when you delegate a task, you can't control what the final deliverable is going to be. So it's something that I have intentionally tried to improve on over the years. It's not something that just, you know, happens right away. It definitely takes practice. But I think 3 things that I've come to realize over the course of my professional life over the past probably 10 years or so, as it relates to delegation, is that 1, done is better than perfect. I promise you will get to a point in either your academic career or your professional life where you are trying to do it all and juggle it all, and you just will burn out. That's what will happen eventually. And sometimes, even though the way you do things might end up in a perfect state at the end, some things just need to be done. That's just how it is. Secondly, I think delegation really gives other people the opportunity to step up and to shine. When you assign a project to somebody else and say, hey, I need you to take the lead on this, that gives them the opportunity to really say, okay, I'm going to commit myself to this project, and I'm going to show everybody what I've got and what I can do. And that's something really special that I think that you can give to another person. And then lastly, if and when you decide to make delegating decisions, do not micromanage. Micromanaging is basically just like not delegating at all. So literally, when you delegate something, give it to that person and let them take it. Obviously give them very clear instructions on how things should be done and what the final deliverable should be. But don't sit there and say, hey, I know that this isn't due till 4 p.m., but are you going to get it in at 4 p.m.? Just, let them, like I said, take the lead. Dylan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think, because I'm not gonna lie, I'm still control is helpful for me. I think control is attractive to me, and it's not my favorite part of myself, but it is like part of my core personality. Shout out to the Enneagram. And so for me, the reframe that was really helpful is, and why I think we left this as like a single slide at the end, is that if I understand myself, what I want, the outcomes I'm looking for, when I delegate, I can explain those very clearly to somebody. And when you delegate, if you can delegate the outcome, you don't have to delegate the process. And so, or there's a balance in there that each of us has to find when it comes to how we delegate. Sometimes done is better than just kind of you being super overwhelmed and having to do it yourself. And if you are clear enough with your communication on the front end, you can actually set someone up for success in a way that you want them to be successful. So you can give them the right process that you're looking for to get them to the outcome you both desire. So it's that kind of delegating and having enough self-awareness to know what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to actually move into some Q&A time. I know there's probably a lot of questions floating around out there, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And this is Catherine Pope, our student voice liaison. Catherine has been with us for this whole academic year. If you are part of the Leadership Academy, there is an opportunity to become a paid student employee the following year. So that's another cool benefit of the Leadership Academy. And that is what Kat has been a part of our team for since, I think, September, right? All right, cool. So she's going to lead the Q&A.
You're still muted, Kat. Kat, you're still muted. It's okay.
Hi. So my first question is, how do you maintain this productivity rate? Because there's one thing setting yourself up for it, and it's another thing really maintaining this. So let's start off with Hannah. How do you maintain this productivity rate?
I think that, so one thing that I've learned is that, well, obviously I'm going to say the most obvious answer is self-care. I think that there was been a point at different positions that I've had here at Safe Project and elsewhere where I was giving it 110% of the time. And as a result, my personal and professional life really, struggled because we are not meant to do that all of the time. So I think for me, from a professional standpoint, that came down to making very clear boundaries as it relates to work. And I think it's harder than ever because we're all in a very virtual environment right now. And it's just really hard to say, I'm going to shut my laptop at 5 p.m. and go eat dinner. When you still have so your to-do list is still sitting there and there's not really much else going on and you don't really want to cook dinner. But yeah, I would just say setting very clear boundaries has been helpful in being able to show up every day in the same kind of organized and productive way.
I love your answer. And before I go to Dylan, I wanted to follow up with, what does your work-life balance look like? So what does that look like in your life?
So it looks like having pretty clear outlines of when I work and when I don't. Again, I know that a lot of us get into the habit of just, working all day into the evening. And I know that, as students, you don't have the option all the time to say, I'm going to stop working at 6 p.m. because you have a paper due at midnight. But I think one thing that has been helpful with that is block scheduling. So really, I think that's what it's called. It's really just saying, okay, Monday from 1 to 5 p.m. I'm working on this paper. That's all I'm working on. I'm putting my phone in the closet and that's what I'm going to work on. And that's helped be productive. But I think the main thing that has truly helped balancing work and life is saying, on the weekends, I'm spending time with my family and I'm not checking the email from my boss and I'm not answering that phone call from my coworker. I'm going to get to it on Monday because I'm sorry, Dylan. I'll answer the call if it comes from you. But yeah, again, it comes back down to boundaries.
Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing what that looks like in your life. Dylan, how does that look like in your life? How do you maintain your productivity? And what does your work-life balance look like?
Yeah, I think how I stay, it feels like a weird answer, but I stay productive by saying no to things. We assume that the more you say yes, the more productive you're going to be, which is the exact opposite usually. And so it's about me knowing what is important to me personally, whether or not it's important to Safe Project on that day. As long as I know what is important to me, I know what motivates me. I will. The other side of this is if I know what motivates me and I fill myself only with those things, I'm going to burn myself out. Also, I'm someone who will burn myself out both by doing things I love and doing things that I don't love. So it's about, instead for me, the reframe is I say no to things that either I don't want to do or I don't think are in line with what needs to be done right now. And I fill my life with things that are rewarding outside of work. Because for me, I'm not good at saying, oh, it's 5 o'clock, I'm done with work. At 5 o'clock, I want to have something else to look forward to. So I play a lot of video games. I hang out with my dog who's snoring behind me. I cook dinner, and it's important to me to do things that fill me up in addition to work, because my work does fill me up in addition to pour me out sometimes, right? But it's that balance of, I love my work. I'm very fortunate to love my work, and I need to love other things outside of that throughout the day.
It's great. It sounds like you're talking about a lot of things that re-energize you. We have a question in the chat for someone wants to know if you are currently experiencing burnout. How do you have any tips for dealing with that? Obviously, prevention is the best, but if you are burnt out, do you have any tips for getting back on your game?
I'll go first on this one, but I think if you are already burnout, that's a lesson of it's not too late to take care of yourself. I don't want to say that, but if you are burnout now, you've missed 500 red flags of you're burning out, you're burning out, you're burning out. And so college for me was learning what those red flags were for me. It was not being able to sleep at night because I was thinking about class or thinking about work, or skipping things outside of class because I wanted to do my homework. And but we all miss those red flags and we get burnout at some point. For me, it's giving myself permission and surrounding myself with people who will force me to, if I don't give myself permission, to take a break. Because when you take time off is when you can come back better, rather than just try to grind yourself through being burnout, which doesn't make any sense, but we do it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what Kat said about prevention is obviously the most important thing. But if you're already there, which we all get there, life ebb and flows all the time. And, I've been there and I'll be there again eventually one day, I'm sure. I think for me, I really try to kind of take myself out of my current situation and look at what I have going on from a really high level. And there's been times where I literally made myself sick. I had stomach issues from stress and, not sleeping well and not eating well. It's kind of a domino effect at that point when you feel burnt out. So really trying to intentionally take time to step back, look at the situation as a whole and say, is this thing that I'm so scared about or so stressed about going to matter in 5 years? Or is it going to be something that I don't even think about ever again? And I think you can really relate this to kind of where you are at as a student, where you are most likely taking lots of credits. You are maybe doing some internships, you're working part-time, and all of those things combined can cause a lot of anxiety and eventual burnout. But when you look at the big picture and maybe you say, I can't do all three right now. And you can say, you can start prioritizing and saying, you know what, I'm a sophomore. I don't think I need to do an internship or 4 internships this semester. And then kind of cut back from that and say at the end, in 5 years from now, what's going to be the most important? And it's going to be that you maintained your health and your recovery, and that you worked really hard and did the best you could at all of your classes. You maintained your relationships. Those really important things. So I think the answer would be to just kind of remove yourself from your current situation and kind of look at the big picture.
I love that you're talking about priorities. That goes into our next question, which is, how do you say no to things that you would enjoy, but you just don't have time to do well?
Hannah, you go first on this one.
How do we say no to things that we know we would enjoy?
But you just don't have the
That's a hard question. I think that if you've experienced burnout before, then you know what kind of how that spirals and just kind of, you're just not yourself once you reach that point. And I think knowing that is helpful in decision making. So, for example, when I first started here at Safe Project almost 3 years ago, I'm incredibly passionate about the work that I do and everything that Safe is doing. And I volunteered to help on literally every project. But that did lead to some burnout. And I think realizing that saying yes to something means you're saying no to something else. And that's like pretty cliche, but that could mean saying no to like my actual role at Safe Project. If I'm saying yes to helping out other people on their projects, I'm probably taking away from my role helping students. And then I'm probably taking away from, you know, some quality time that I have with my husband in the evenings, that kind of thing. So really thinking about if you say yes to that thing, what are you actually going to be taking away from is helpful in making those decisions.
I struggled a little bit in college with like, I don't want to do my homework. I want to go hang out with my friends was kind of the priorities I was working with. As an adult, which is silly to say now that I'm talking about video games in this response, is I use the same desk for work and like playing video games and watching TV. It's my everything desk. And so I use the same like cycle we used. It was on the slide of like, I take as many cues to do those other things away from my environment when it's time to not do them. And so I put my controllers away. I take all my work stuff out when it's time to work. And if you can control your cues, it's a good first step. And then you can make your way around that cycle again to change your behavior.
Thank you for that. I think this is best suited for Dylan. We have someone in the audience who is a perfectionist, but who struggles with organization. So is there a habit that they can create to help them create space for the conflicting feelings that they experience because of these two conflicting?
I'll speak from just personal experience. This probably isn't like a wise like piece of advice that is going to fix your problems, but that was me in college where like I had to learn that it was okay. I had to give myself permission to be imperfect. And that's a huge life change and a huge like thing that I had to surround myself with people that were willing to encourage me to do that and surround myself in jobs and experiences with people who are willing to say like, stop you from doing what you're going to do if no one stops you. And because a lot of us end up building unhealthy, almost addictive relationships with work and outcomes where it's a lot of healing of saying, look, you actually are enough and you're going to do enough as long as you don't overdo it. When you overdo it is when you become the worst part of yourself or the most kind of quote unquote dangerous part of yourself, which was how I ended up in some of my worst times in college was me doing too much and seeking too much control.
So we're going to shift gears a bit and talk about delegating. So Hannah, how do you decide what to delegate to each person? How do you determine the strengths of people that are in your arsenal to delegate to?
That's an awesome question. I think that by the time you get to a point of delegation, you probably know the people that are in the circle of potential delegatees, I suppose you could say. So yeah, I think the first thing is just knowing the strengths of the people that might take on a task. You know, I once worked with somebody who, this person comes to mind, where they weren't super detail oriented. They were, you know, not organized by the, you know, the traditional way that we think of organization, but they were such a people person. They could connect with like a sloth, and they just really like, they just had this like gift of interacting with other people. So if I was going to have, you know, if I was going to be leading a webinar and maybe I was sick, you know, I had to be out that day, I would probably delegate that task to this person because I knew that they could hop on the webinar and start talking to people and connecting with people very easily. If I had somebody on my team who maybe is a little more shy, you know, doesn't really do good in large groups, I probably wouldn't delegate that task to that person. Even if that meant canceling the webinar, I probably wouldn't put that, you know, I probably wouldn't do that to that person because that could really hurt their ego and, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that it's understanding the strengths of people and taking the time to figure out what those strengths are. So I also at Safe Project, in addition to overseeing the Leadership Academy, I also oversee our internship program as well. And from the beginning, I really try to get to know the students, what their passions are, what they want to learn more about, things that they feel their strengths are, their weaknesses are. That way, as we're working on different projects throughout the semester, I can kind of say, oh, Jess was really, really great when I asked her to, design that slide for us. She must have that creative side. So, and just knowing those little things and taking the time to get to know people is really important.
Thank you. So there's definitely, when we do end up delegating, there's like a fine line between nagging people and keeping them on deadline. We had a lot of people in the chat talking about how micromanaging makes them feel uncomfortable. It's one of their biggest pet peeves. And of course, we all feel that way. But when you delegate something to someone that's very important, you have to follow up with them. So how do you tiptoe the fine line between nagging and micromanaging and just making sure that someone gets it done? This is to Dylan.
Yeah, so people said in the chat that they really dislike micromanaging, and I do too, which is how that's why I don't micromanage. Just so I always step back and say, if someone was doing this to me, how would I feel? Would I feel like they don't trust me? Would I feel like they are kind of wanting the control? And then I kind of reverse engineer that into me reacting how I would want to be checked in on. It's okay to check in on people, but it's checking on them is different than checking in on their work, if that makes sense. I usually try to start with checking in on the person, and then if we get to the work, we do. But most of this work is actually not that important. Like, it'll get done, and life will continue on. But yeah, I think if I feel like I'm micromanaging, I am. So I just stop. It's kind of the biggest piece of advice, is be willing to just stop yourself and give it time. And then if it's really that important, you'll come back a couple hours later.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, I think that setting clear expectations from the very beginning can also be helpful in that, by outlining, this is the project, this is kind of what we expect. And then saying, I'm going to check in with you on Wednesday evening and just see how you're doing. That way the expectation is set at the beginning, and they're just kind of waiting for that check-in, and then don't check in before that. Don't reach out on Tuesday at 5 p.m.
If you're going to micromanage anybody, micromanage yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Kat, I think we'll probably wrap up now, just because we are coming up to the top of the hour, and we do have some just quick housekeeping things that we wanted to share with everybody. Just going to reshare my screen really quick. All right, so we hope that you all enjoyed this webinar. It's been really fun to prepare for this webinar. I know Dylan and I really enjoyed kind of bouncing some ideas away from each other, and we hope these are essentially the takeaways. At the end of the day, we want you to know that it's important to figure out what works for you, and to not, comparison is a losing game. If you compare yourself to the most organized friend that you have and try to do exactly everything that they do, you'll fail, because you're not that person. So, so we hope that you leave feeling a little bit more empowered to do that. All right, Dylan, do you want to share a little bit about our next webinar, which is happening in a little bit less than 2 weeks?
Yeah, so on the 9th of March, same time, but on a Tuesday instead of a Thursday, we're going to bring in James Larkus, who is at the University of Denver and also is a wellness coach for his own private business. He's going to be talking about failure with you all. So if failure has been a struggle of yours, or you just kind of are never quite sure how to bounce back when things go sideways, he's going to talk about mind mishaps and the F word being failure.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining. We hope everybody has a really nice evening or afternoon. I know we have some people as far as Hawaii in here. So if you have any follow-up questions or want to connect with Dylan and I for any reason, feel free to reach out. Our email address is on our website. And yeah, thanks again for joining, everybody.
Bye.